Hi guys, today we're shooting Stevie Vaughan player study, which involves getting the tone. Now, as you guys probably know, Stevie played a lot of strats, pretty much all strats. So we started off with one that we've used before. This is a US standard strat. We've actually fitted it with the noiseless pickups. We get a lot of buzz here. There's a pylon just over the building, and this was kind of a practical thing. Annoyingly, this sounded fantastic beforehand. It still sounds cool, but it doesn't sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan now. The pickups we had in it before, which were the stock pickups, got us a really nice, deep, fat, kind of rich strat tone. These ones are a bit more kind of, I guess you'd say, sort of glassy, a bit more kind of almost fragile sounding, kind of like ice picky. Didn't really get us in the, up the right sort of street. It's a real shame because it really was perfect beforehand, but what can you do? So what we did was we settled for this gorgeous piece of wood, which is a master-built Jason Smith Strat. This is basically as good as Fender Strats get. I mean, this is serious money. A lot of time and effort has gone into this by one of the Fender master builders. One guy builds the whole thing, start to finish. I mean, this really is, the pinnacle of strats, basically. This particular one, I mean, you can see by looking at it, it's a kind of 60s thing, so sort of three-tone sunburst with the rosewood board. But really the reason that we used it is the pickups. They just sort of gave us that Stevie sound, kind of thick, slightly higher output than the other one. Really fantastic. I mean, you'll hear on the recordings, hopefully, that it really does kind of start to sound like Stevie much more than the other one. There are strats and there are strats, basically, and this is kind of the second one. So that was pretty much us. Another honourable mention to this other one, which is cool. Very recent battle wound and has lost a thick E string, but it's a fantastic guitar. Lovely sounding, but again, we just got that sort of Stevie vibe with the master build. So. Also with the pickups, there are lots of different kinds of pickups that you can get for a Strat. You've got kind of vintage ones which tend to be lower output. You'll sort of hear more from the kind of wood of the guitar, and then you'll get kind of vintage but kind of hot, like for instance the Fender Texas Specials, which will get you in that kind of area for Stevie, that sort of Texas blues, aggressive, full Strat tone. And then you've got kind of more modern things. You'd maybe sort of from a Fender SCN off the top of my head, which would be much higher output, much more kind of gain going on, maybe less dynamic, just because they are so loud. But yeah, every Strat sounds completely different, really. I mean, they can look exactly the same, but sound and play feel completely different. Sorry. Here we are in amp corner. With Stevie Ray Vaughan, he used a lot of different amps through his career. The Fender Vibroverb, which was the sort of staple of his sound through most of his career. He had a Dumble steel string singer, which is very difficult for me to say at least. Various other Marshalls, lots and lots of different amps going on. Generally, if you're going to be looking to get that kind of Stevie tone, you want a nice clean amp, a valve amp with lots of headroom. That means that you're able to play reasonably loud without it getting too sort of driven, too distorted, okay? So for that, you're going to be, most of you, I would imagine, looking at kind of a Fender amp. This particular one is a Fender Blues Deluxe. It's a 40 watt, gives us lots of headroom, at least for the volumes that we're going to be playing it at. So if you want to come in close, I'll take you through the settings that we had it on to get us that kind of tone. So, starting at this end, we'll start with the presence. So presence, for those of you that don't know, is frequency somewhere in between the middle and the treble. It's kind of brightness, I guess you could call it. We had it on pretty much 12 o'clock, not too bright, not too dull. We just found that kind of put us in the right area. So reverb, Stevie used a pretty dry tone, to be honest. There wasn't a lot of reverb going on at all. Different reverbs on different amps, you're going to have to use different amounts. You just have to use your ear. But what you want to do is as little as possible. I mean, really, he used pretty much none. And any reverb that you hear on the record generally is going to be from the room, which you achieve from recording with a microphone sort of further away from the amp. But anyway, so reverb for us, we had it on about 3 out of 12, so reasonably low. Master we weren't using, that's for the drive channel. Okay, so onto the EQ. So a pretty flat EQ. I mean, this is going to depend on your guitar. Even if you're, using a Strat, it depends how the individual Strats sounded. For us, mids were on about just over halfway, so 7 out of 12 for us. I guess you'd sort of call that, I don't know, maybe 12:30, 1 o'clock sort of position. You will just have to use your ears. What you want to do is make sure that you've got plenty of mids in there. You don't want it too scooped. Stevie did use pedals to boost the mids, which we're going to get onto in a minute, but you've got to have some there. You don't want to be going for a kind of completely scooped sound. Onto the bass, we had that slightly higher on 8. Again, that was just to give some sort of beef to the Strat. Really, again, we might easily have used a different guitar and had it down here or up here, but we found that 8 was pretty good for us. We backed off on the treble slightly. So that's on sort of, I guess, sort of 10 o'clock, something like that, 5 out of 12. Again, it was a nice balance, really. We didn't want it too bright, but you've got to have it sort of cutting through. Drive is not relevant. That's not the channel that we're using. And then the volume. This amp is exceptionally loud. I mean, anything above kind of here, and it's really, really, really loud. I mean, ideally, we probably would have had it a little bit higher. But, you've always got to compromise with these things. I mean, we pretty much had it loud gig volume, I would say. Okay, cool. Normal bright switch, we just left that on normal. The bright switch, generally with these amps, you're only really looking at using that with a humbucker equipped guitar to kind of compensate for the sort of compressed lack of high ends that you get with a humbucker. Single coils, you're probably going to want to leave it on normal mode. Okay, that's the amps. Okay, so let's have a look at the pedals that Stevie used. Really, it's just one that kind of stands out. That's a Tube Screamer. He used the TS-808, TS-9, TS-10. Most of his career, actually, TS-9 was the sort of favoured one, even though he's probably most famous for using the 808. Throughout much of the 80s, it was the 9. What we have here is a TS Mini, which aesthetically at least looks like the TS kind of 808, and it is kind of maybe closer to that perhaps than the TS9. They're not, in the grand scheme of things, all that different. I mean, different Tube Screamers sound different. I mean, that's a fact. The circuit has changed a reasonable amount over the years. If you're using a Tube Screamer of some kind, whether it's the TS9, the TS Mini, the 808, the 10, the 7, or something made by another manufacturer. Just about every manufacturer out there does their own version of the Tube Screamer. You're going to be able to get roughly in the right kind of ballpark for a Stevie Ray Vaughan lead tone. Now, to give you an idea of how to set it, you want overdrive. We went for just below half. We found that was what gave us a nice mix of kind of dynamics, but also nice and thick. Okay, you still want to be able to hear that you're playing a Strat through this. If you've got that too high, they can get a little bit too much. You're hearing too much pedal and not enough guitar. For us, tone-wise, pretty much 12 o'clock. Level just past 12. That was pretty much unity for us. What Stevie used to do was set up the Tube Screamer so that it acted as a solo boost. Now, that basically means that you're setting your amp up for your rhythm tone, and then the second you do a solo, you pop the Tube Screamer on. He had the level pretty high and the drive pretty low, which meant that it was just sort of driving the amp. You were getting the kind of overdrive driven thick sound that you were getting out of the amp, just kind of using it to sort of push the amp over the edge. Now, that's kind of how we used it, but we had the level a little bit lower because we needed the volume of the solo stuff and the rhythm stuff to be roughly the same. Whilst Dan was teaching, we couldn't have it suddenly start singing out whilst he went onto the lead stuff. That wouldn't really make sense. In a live situation, as I say, maybe slightly less drive, slightly more level. So let's hear how it sounds. We've got our lovely Masterbuilt Strat here. I'm just going to play like a basic blues lick and kick the tube screamer on, and hopefully you can hear the difference. Basically what it's going to do is add a bit of drive, but a lot of mids. Okay, it's really going to sort of push the mid-range of the amp. It kind of cuts the bass a little bit, tightens your sound up, kind of cuts the super highs off as well. That's what your tone knob is for on the tube screamer. So as I say, it's going to be a very focused, punchy, middly sound. Okay, so let's see if I can demonstrate it. I've got it on the mid pickup here, which is a nice sort of, I guess, middle ground you would say. But so anyway. Okay, and with the tube screamer. Okay, so a bit of a volume jump there. As I say, it's mostly the mid-range that's being pushed of the amp. So that's basically a good idea of everything that Stevie was using pedal-wise. Okay, so that summarises our Getting the Tone section for Stevie Ray Vaughan. It's easy to say, but this one really is mostly all in the fingers, so make sure you listen to Dan. If you've got yourself a Strat, doesn't have to be a Masterbuilt custom shop one like this. If you've got yourself a Strat, a Fender amp and a tube screamer, you're going to be sounding pretty much like Stevie as long as you've got those licks down. Okay, so I'll see you next time.